Has Dan Hurley moved on from Meleek Thomas? You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A little housekeeping on my side. YouTube support has been amazing since March 3rd. We are still the fastest growing show on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's been amazing to see. I love to have all of my subscribers also download the audio version wherever you get to your podcasts. It's equally as important so we can make the Locked On UConn audience grow. So if you can do me two quick favors, first, click that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. You should hear a click. Then head over to Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss a moment of Locked On UConn. Can't tell you how much that support means to me. I love it. If you can get me a 5-star review, if you feel like it's warranted, good reviews kind of get us more people that are interested in following more UConn content. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, is Dan Hurley souring on the Meleek Thomas recruiting journey, if you will? I think the answer is maybe. The rumor is UConn and Hurley believe that Meleek would have already committed by now and are tired of waiting around. Their plan now, according to some sources who reached out to me, are going all in on Acaden Lewis to secure his commitment and have him be the guy, which Acaden is still a great pickup. And if that's entirely true, I expect Acaden to be a Husky. If you remember, this is not entirely dissimilar to something that would come out of left field. If UConn has their sights set on you and there are any red flags, Dan Hurley and company typically focus on other kids or pull off. Think about the Kobe Brea, Aiden Mahaney portal season, recruitment aspect. Both Hurley targets would make a lot of sense, right? But if you look at Kobe, Bronx kid, close to UConn, 50% three-point shooter, the next UConn guard, right? Well, when it came down to it, the inside scoop of what I heard and really kind of what went down is Brea wanted one last payday, right? It's and I don't blame him, but that's the reality when you kind of play with going from one school to another. Aiden's upside was too good to pass up, more years of eligibility. So the inside scoop was, let's be honest, when you have leverage, you dictate the recruitment. So Dan Hurley and company are not going to be begging players to come to UConn. You have to want to come to UConn, and the offer is the offer. I've been in recruitment. I've been in sales. I've been in business development for years. Leverage is held by the company that is likely been in business longer, has a standard operating procedure that they go with. And they're not dictated by the candidates. They're not dictated by their clients. They offer you something. If you don't like it, they move on. They can go with somebody else. Trust me, they'll replace you. They're not worried about it. So Dan Hurley doesn't have to do what Coach Cal and John Shire do. They're essentially begging 18-year-old kids to come to their school and give them money willy-nilly. And they say, we'll figure it out. We don't really have a process like UConn does. And I don't know if you've listened to Dan Hurley lately in his media availability. But this UConn program is run like a business. It 100% is. They have standard operating procedures. He used terms like organization. If you look at their social media, they gamify a bunch of competitions, and they use the Olympics as a way to do it. A lot of corporations do company outings and fun events like the softball tournament that shows kind of the human side, right? You get Dan Hurley flipping bats, and that's all great. But they use those little breaks to kind of get everyone together so that when it's coming down to business and we're looking at third and fourth quarter numbers and we're like, hey, where are the sales? Where is the ROI? Because if you've listened to Dan Hurley at other interviews, He wants return on his investment for what he's paying these kids through NIL and what they're gaining from him in the respect of his coaching wisdom, the fact that they're coming to a program that's a national champion. So, I mean, hell, they even have exit interviews when kids leave for the summer before they even come back to school. I'm not talking about like off season. I'm talking about they have the camp, then they have the softball game. And it's like, okay, he was like, yeah, some of the guys, during their exit interviews are doing this. Like, I know other coaches do exit interviews, and I'm not saying that's new or innovative, but it's all encompassing. It's everything together wrapped up into, Dan wants players who are both feet in, diving headfirst into the UConn way, not dipping toes in the water like, yeah, cool, he called me a badass at camp. I'm a badass too. Like, okay, like that doesn't, they want commitments. They want solid commitments. And so, like, you can even hear in his voice the disdain for the kids that say, they're gonna go work out with trainers, and say he tries to give them things to focus on instead. I don't know about any of these kids, but if I'm a UConn player, I'm listening to Danny Hurley and not Johnny or Jimmy Trainer with 50K followers on Instagram because he promises the next Hezzy or some next move that'll revolutionize basketball. So, coach wants kids that want to be in his inner circle. And if it's Acaden Lewis versus Meleek Thomas, I honestly could care less. Like, whoever they choose and whoever chooses them as well is golden, and they will be a Husky, and we will follow them. The same thing with Cam Spencer, the Tristan Newtons, the Jordan Hawkins, the Isaiah Whaleys, the Wrench. There's no such thing as being halfway in with UConn. You're either jumping in the pool with him, with the Huskies, or we'll pull the offer and move on. It's really that simple. But with UConn, it's not about the best kid. It's about who fits the system. And that's always the way it's been. And people hate that. We don't get the number one overall guy like Cooper Flag. Cool. You want to go to Duke? Go to Duke, man. Have a great time. And I'm not even making fun of it. Like, go on TikTok, paint your fingernails. That if you want to do that and that makes you feel special and great, then do it. But that's just not what UConn's about. We're about work, winning championships, and the camaraderie. Just imagine this, though. Like, if you're having a hard time with this, like in terms of understanding why they would do this, and this also could just be a ploy where they're like, listen, man, this is what it is, and we're going to go after another guy. And if you want to come, the offer's still on the table, but you got to show to us that you're like willing to come back in. So that also could be the case. But I would imagine it like this. If you've been dating someone for a while, back in the day when I was a single man, all things that, maybe they're going really well with a girl that you really like, or for you ladies that watch a guy you really like, or whoever, you've been dropping hints that you're ready to take the relationship to the next level, make things exclusive. And you're expecting that, they probably should have committed by then, but instead they've been hesitant. They're keeping you in the bit of a limbo. You start realizing that waiting around isn't healthy. You're a young enough person where you're like, listen, maybe I'm just going to step away and focus on me versus being in some kind of toxic relationship with someone who isn't sure about themselves. And then almost magically, because this has happened to me in the past, you catch lightning in a bottle and you meet someone else, someone who's all in from the start, who's excited about being with you and excited, hangs on every word that you say. And it's a great matchup for you in every way. So that's essentially the scenario that UConn is in right now. And, Meleek Thomas is the hesitant partner because, listen, it's so easy for these kids to have FOMO, fear of missing out. Maybe Arkansas is going to give me a little more money. Maybe I can get that same amount of money at UConn and have my cake and eat it too. Dan Hurley doesn't play that. So if he finds inherently a more willing partner with Acaden Lewis, committed to UConn and what their success is, or even another guard, Darius Adams, whoever, and they're ready to build something great together, that's essentially what Dan Hurley and company are looking for. So we'll talk more about targets for UConn and what it means if UConn sends this message that we don't play games, what that also means to other recruits. We'll let you visit, but the offer is still the offer. And this isn't the NBA. There's not a ton of negotiation from the two-time defending champs. That's it. We'll talk about that and more coming up after this. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Motors, eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S.-based customers. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn. So who is this list of players that UConn is looking for? And I wonder if there's ever going to be a similar aspect to the whole Meleek Thomas versus Acaden Lewis. I think they have to be targeting some bigs. They have to be targeting some taller players, like, you know, the wing players that are 6'10", 6'11". And I just wonder, though, if the same things can be said for, let's say, like Nico Pandalo, who's a big Kentucky target. You know, Mark Pope is a little different animal than, say, Calipari, but it's still Kentucky, and they're going to throw a ton of money his way. I think they tried to get Great Osabor to come, and obviously he followed his coach to Washington, also the Huskies. But I mean, a guy like that getting, you know, $1.52 million as the, you know, as a big, but not even like a threat to be a top 3-point shooter, which, you know, Nico has a unique skill set, able to stretch the floor, also good on defense. So I'm curious, you know, at some point, I would love to pick Dan Hurley's brain about how he goes about the counter argument of other teams, because a part of me believes that, knowing that he's secure in what he's built at UConn, that he doesn't need to do what I've seen in other interviews. Like, I saw Cooper Flagg being interviewed by one of his teammates, who I don't know what he looked like, and they didn't have names on their title, but I know it was Cooper Flagg. And he was asking about being recruited by other schools other than Duke. And he said every school says something negative about Duke. I doubt Dan says anything negative, like specifically. He may make like a jab, like, hey, if you want to go to TikTok you know, that's his like old school, like, look, man, we don't play around like that. In fact, we all saw that a long time ago with Isaiah Abraham posting a TikTok in the locker room, and that was quickly taken down and addressed by Dan. So I think the real key to all of this UConn recruiting targets, whether it's Eric Ryby, whether it's Braylon Mullins, is we get caught up on numbers of 4-star, 5-star, 3-star, whatever they are. Dan Hurley and his staff feel like they can bring kids in who have exceptional talent to come in, and we've talked about this in the past. No player comes to UConn a finished product. Steph Castle wasn't a finished product. Pretty damn close as far as basketball to the next level. But these guys come here to be a part of something special. But let's talk about like the ancillary stuff. Like, they come to UConn for exposure too. Steph Castle, Donovan Clingan, Cam Spencer, Tristan Newton, even like the fringe guys. If Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton played the exact same way for New Mexico State, let's say that was the backcourt, they were there and they made it to like the Sweet 16, and they had like a nice little run, but they were like a 13 seed. They don't get drafted. They just don't. Because let's be honest, unless you're a game-changing player and you go to a smaller school, you don't get noticed. If you're a good player that has upside, guess who gets to sell you? National championship coach Dan Hurley can literally go on radio shows and talk about your value, can call up GMs, can call up agents and say, listen, get with my guy here. He is by far going to be a great, potential first round, if not second round pick. He'll work with the 2-way contract. He'll be a G League player until he's ready to play in the NBA. Not everyone has the same clout. And so I think Dan really enjoys getting guys like that who are grinders, who can then, work their way into a position where they can be playing in the pros. And I think he sees that in guys like Terrace Reed, who has a ton of talent, hearing him talk about that in media availability with Joe Arruda, talking about what's Terrace's biggest issue, being that he's too talented and that he has, that's kind of like one of that, what's that old saying, you're jack of all trades, master of none. He can probably do so many things in the basketball court, he doesn't really know what to focus on. So that's kind of what they're steering him in the right direction. Same thing with a guy like Aiden, right? Aiden Mahaney coming in as a 14-point scorer. That's probably not going to be what he's asked to do 100% here. But kind of being able to read defenses, being able to understand the way they play, the physicality. And by the way, we've never talked about this. I love that they run these live practices where they don't call fouls, because there is nothing that bothers fans more than players who complain about calls. Let the fans do it. We can be the a-holes. Let the coaches do it. They can be the ones who get technicals and all that stuff, protecting their players. But players who do it, there's just no bigger turnoff. And I've seen it for years. I was one of the biggest LeBron fans when I was younger. And as I got older, maybe this is just, again, getting older, you just I hate to see it. It's every play. Same with Luka Doncic. I'm not just gonna pick on LeBron. Name an NBA player. Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, pretty much anybody that would just won a gold medal. And I was happy they won. You know what I mean? It's America. Like we're all patriots. It just, what bothers me is, especially at the college level, it's like, don't mimic that. Once you get to be a pro, you can choose what kind of person you want to look like and what kind of example you want to set for not only just kids, but just people in general. People look up to you for whatever, right? Cam Spencer and I are both partnered with the Feel Good Lab, local Connecticut group with Ryan Gresh, right? And I'm so proud of that, because I want to emulate the type of person that, that Cam Spencer is. Hard worker, doesn't take any from anybody, really, really focused on his craft. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So I think it all makes sense with the whole Meleek and Acaden Lewis situation. Acaden's got a little less gravitas, if you will, right? He's not that flashy player. And I like I said, I'm truly okay with either player. But if those rumors are true, it just kind of goes to show you what they don't mess around. Like, and people have asked me about AJ, the number one pick. I'm not going to say his last name because I get made fun of for saying his last name wrong. But the number one overall pick doesn't have UConn in their top 8 because they told him to kick rocks. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to pay him, $3 million, or they're not going to, kowtail to his demands. They're the national champions. They're the ones that are providing you exposure. They're the vehicle for your success to the next level. And if players don't understand that and they feel like they can go it alone or go play for a lesser program, so be it. UConn will win regardless. That's the thing. Now, they're not going to not get talented players, but there's always going to be a line they don't cross. So we're going to talk about the biggest threats to the UConn crown coming up after this. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, when you get fewer games, the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, welcome back to Locked On UConn. I think one of the things I wanted to impress upon this show is, look, we're going to be all over the gamut, whether it's recruiting, whether we're talking about the culture of UConn. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss was, it's going to be really hard to three-peat. It's one of the things that I talked about last year, which was make sure you're enjoying the run that UConn was on, because we knew they were going to have a chance to repeat, and it got really close, and we felt very confident going into the NCAA tournament, as we should have. The most efficient offense of the last 25 years and a top 5 defensive team. So we don't know if we have that yet. So, but I was reading some articles. One that stood out to me was really about, who are really the threats, the biggest threats to the crown, so to speak. And in college basketball, with the NIL and with transfer portal, it can happen pretty quickly how teams rebuild. And Bill Self even had a very candid moment last year talking about how he was thinking about the next season before last season ended. And it showed. They got bounced in the second round unceremoniously by Gonzaga. So he's built up what would be considered a contender. They only had, 12? Not 12. It feels like 12 guys coming in for from the transfer portal because they brought in AJ Storr from Wisconsin, who was formerly of St. John's, then Rylan Griffin from Alabama, 3-point sharpshooter. They still have DeJuan Harris, they have KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson. So that is they're going to be a formidable team, and I'm sure there's like 20 other guys on Kansas. I'm not going to list them because I don't care. But the idea is that this team is going to have a formidable team if they can mesh. There's time for all of that, right? But they're not the only ones, right? Alabama is another team that's poised to make a deep run. Yeah, sure, they lost Rylan Griffin to Kansas, but they reloaded. I believe, didn't they get Emmanuel Amayori, who was a UConn target at one point? They bring back Mark Sears. They have guys who were considering the draft and came back. So they have a team that's just went to their first Final Four, and they've added a few strong additions. So it has its eyes on cutting down nets and being that basketball power to add to their football success. Houston is the one that I would really watch out for because, listen, we can talk crap about the fact that Kelvin Sampson hasn't won after building up these good programs, but we shouldn't ever forget our roots of having one of the best basketball coaches in college basketball history in Jim Calhoun. Before he won a national championship, he was just as good a coach. He got a little snake bitten, whether it was 89-90 at Duke, whether it was 94 against Florida, 96 against Mississippi State, 95 against UCLA, 97 against Carolina before the breakthrough in 98-99, beating Gonzaga and then beating Duke in the final. So there was a host of 6-7 years where Calhoun would win regular season titles, Big East tournament titles, and then he'd be labeled the can't win the big one. So Houston is my biggest. They're eventually going to do it, guys. Like if Kelvin Sampson retires without a national championship, I'd be shocked. He builds teams that are kind of similar to ours, where they just beat you up. And the one thing that he hasn't done, which is what Dan Hurley has done, is brought in offensive minds to kind of mold that kind of defensive grit and create an offensive juggernaut that's efficient. A lot of dunking, a lot of threes. They still do the same style, but they're not as effective. So I hope they never do it, but I would be shocked if Kelvin Sampson retires without a national championship or at least a title game appearance. So LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp are going to form one of the best backcourts in the country. So they're relentless. They follow you on every possession. So they're trying to make the refs call plays. And a lot of times they don't because they're that dangerous where they still do knock the ball away without following you. So there's a lot of, it kind of reminds me of the Seattle Seahawks defense where they would kind of get an illegal contact on every play, but they don't call it every play. So because the refs are afraid to do that. So, especially in a tournament setting, if you get Houston on a run, that'd be a tough out. And of course there's always Duke until they have a complete collapse, which is possible, I guess. They're always going to be in the conversation. And this year, it's no different. They bring in Cooper Flagg, who's going to be an NBA player. I don't know. I know his style of play is going to make it in the NBA. What's going to be interesting to me is how they put the pieces around him, because he's a big kid. He's 6'10", 6'11". He can step outside and shoot it. Do they have enough pieces around him? They don't have enough. They don't have any proven pieces, but they can. They're for other freshmen going to step up and allow him to pass out of double teams, repost, create advantages. We'll see how good a coach John Shire is. Certainly has the talent. So the question for them is whether they can bring it all together when it counts. So where does that leave us, right? Despite being the reigning back-to-back champions, we're really not getting as much. And people think I've fake this up. Go find the article. It's on CBSSports.com. It's Candid Coaches. And I think UConn only got a 7% chance of winning it all from coaches. And they're kind of flying under the radar. That's exactly where we thrive. Almost no one expected UConn to dominate the way they did last year. We all saw how that turned out. Dan Hurley and his staff have proven they know how to build championship teams. It's the same thing I've been talking about for the last 6 months. if this was another school with a back-to-back national champion, we'd be the preseason number one, and people will be talking about, can Alex Caravan and company repeat and three-peat as champions? So it won't be easy, of course, but obviously Kansas, Alabama, Houston, Duke, they're all reloaded and ready to go and chomping at the bit, especially Alabama and Houston, I believe. Kansas, I'll believe in Kansas when Bill Self gets one of these super teams kind of off the mat with Hunter Dickinson in his 27th year. But what makes the challenging so exciting is UConn has defied expectations before, and I truly believe we're gearing up to do that again. Do I think we're going to go undefeated? No. Do I think, we're going to have some stumbles and some growing pains? Yes. But if you listen to the first part of this show, that's just the way we like it. We want to build this team so that what Dan Hurley is doing to them now in practice and leading into these meaningful games is that it's almost easier for them to just play free. And the games are easier than the practice. The organization does that on purpose so that there's no, when the bright lights are on, we're ready to rock. So they're not just defending their title. They're out to prove they're still the best team in the country. So, I mean, honestly, guys, I think it's going to be a great upcoming season. Don't forget, Fridays are now Football Fridays. We are going to do a Friday football show. We've already recorded a show with the TNT podcast boys to give you an in-depth first part analysis of the UConn Huskies and what to expect this season. The following week, you'll get part 2 of that. Every Friday will be a Football Friday, whether I have my guys with me from TNT or not, because this is a UConn podcast, not just a UConn men's basketball podcast. So, and going forward, again, starting in September, not sure the date, probably the end of September, we're going to have a separate UConn women's basketball podcast. So just be on the lookout for that. And, I've got my home field sweatshirt on, recent supporter of ours from Locked On Podcast Network. So go get your home field gear. Hopefully I'll have some promo codes to share with you guys in the future. So second off, thank you for making Locked On UConn your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin, get you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. Definitely listen to him. Also listen to us about Locked On UConn football. But look, he's going to be discussing the upcoming season. Maybe UConn football will be a part of it. Who knows? Including the conference realignment, transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, 12 teams now, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.